If you don't smile at him, I'll leave you alone with him for the rest of your life. That's what he whispered in my ear, cigarette dangling from his lips and a firm hand on my shoulder. My name is Lillian Grace Hobbs. I'm 80 years old, from Jackson, Mississippi, but back then I wasn't anything more than a breathing backpack on the passenger seat of my daddy's truck. I didn't even feel like I had a name. He called me girl, or worse, lucky, like I was some filthy charm he carried around, stopping at every roadside dump to sell what he called life experience. I was 7 the first time I climbed into that truck. The smell of diesel, mildew, and burnt cigarettes stayed with me longer than any childhood affection. My mama had left. I don't know where or why. I just remember him saying, "It's just you and me now, girl. Time to make some money." And he did. His way. The kind of money that burns your stomach once you find out how it was made. At first I didn't get it. Just knew we'd stop at filthy gas stations. He'd talk to men with strange eyes. And then I had to be polite. He'd say, "Do Daddy a favor, be sweet, and leave me alone with men I didn't even know the names of." Then he'd come back laughing, bags in hand, saying I was his winning ticket. When I asked why those men looked at me like that, he'd say, "'Cause you're as pretty as your mama was. Use it to your advantage." And I believed him, because he was my daddy, right? We want to believe. We grow up thinking a father is someone who protects, who cares. But mine threw me into the arms of strangers and gave me a piece of candy as a reward. By 9, I knew the name of every gas station between Jackson and El Paso. I knew which had locked bathrooms, which left the doors open. I remembered the faces of the men who came back more than once, learned to recognize their smells, the way they laughed, the low voices they used when they thought nobody was listening. My daddy said I had to smile, said men liked happy girls. And when I didn't, he'd squeeze my arm till it bruised. "Want to eat today?" Then smile. Simple as that. There was a time, at a station near Shreveport, I cried, quiet in the corner of the seat, because it hurt, because I was tired. He saw, pulled over, got out, opened the door and yanked me by the hair. "Crying doesn't pay for gas, girl. Crying doesn't fill a belly. You'll learn now." He locked me in the back of the truck till the next day. No food, no water. Said it was to teach me to be strong. There was no school, no toys. I used to draw on the fogged window with my finger. Sad little faces, my name. Then I'd wipe it all away with my coat, like none of it existed. And the worst part, I started believing it was normal, that other girls lived like that too, that maybe the fault was mine, for not smiling the right way, for not being pleasing enough, for not being as lucky as he said I was. The only moment I could breathe was when he slept, snored loud, belly full of cheap beer, and one hand still on the wheel like he was driving in his dreams. Those were the moments I'd curl into a corner and think about running. But run where? To who? I didn't know anyone. Half the time I didn't even know where we were. The maps taped to the dash were just a bunch of strange names. All I knew was the hard seat, the oil smell, and the sound of coins falling into his hand after I came back from the bathroom. There was one day, in Amarillo, a woman from the station called me over, hair pulled into a bun, sad eyes, gave me a piece of gum and asked if I was okay. I almost cried but just shook my head. My daddy showed up fast, gave a fake smile and pulled me back. Later, slapped me in the back of the head. "Don't talk to strangers, girl. Curious people disappear easy." I slept afraid of what was coming, of what already happened, afraid of forgetting my real name. Because in every place he made one up. Lucy, Carrie, Beth, said it was to not leave a trail, so nobody would remember. And that's how it went. Years passing, me growing up inside a truck, with marks on my body and in my mind, with stories no one would believe if I told them, with a hole in my chest that not even time could fill. But that was just the beginning, because what he started doing once he noticed I was becoming a young woman, there's no name for that. All I know is that's when my heart decided that one day I'd vanish, disappear, even if it meant disappearing from myself. If you made it this far, sweetheart, wait for the next part, because what I still have to tell you, it's not easy to hear. I remember the first time he left me alone overnight. I was 10. We were somewhere in Arkansas, I think. It was a dark stretch of nothing with a single gas station, the kind that smelled like burnt rubber and hopelessness. He said he had to go handle something, told me to wait inside the restroom and lock the door, gave me half a sandwich, a bottle of soda, and said, "If anyone knocks, you say nothing. Got it?" I nodded. What else could I do? My legs were shaking, but I didn't ask questions. I had learned by then, questions meant trouble. He didn't come back that night. I waited, crouched on the tiled floor, staring at the door like it was going to disappear. Every creak, every step outside made my breath stop. Hours passed. The soda got warm, the sandwich dried out, and I started to count my fingers just to stay calm. When morning came, I was still there. He finally showed up smelling like whiskey and sweat. "You're still here?" He laughed like it was some kind of joke. "Didn't think you'd last the night. Maybe you do got some spine." He gave me $1. Said I earned it. That was the first time he paid me for staying quiet. I didn't even realize what that meant until later. As I got older, things changed. Not for the better. My body started to change, and that's when he started using different words. "Now you're really worth something," he'd say. I was 11. He'd pat my knee and smirk. "They like 'em young, but they pay more when they start to look like women." I didn't feel like a woman. I felt like a prisoner with a price tag. But I nodded, like always. He started making longer stops. Not just gas stations anymore. Motels, truck stops, sometimes even people's homes. Places where people didn't ask questions, and if they did, he had answers ready. "That's my niece," he'd say. "She's helping me on the road. Homeschooling and all." He even had a fake notebook filled with pretend homework for me to carry around. A whole performance. There were nights I pretended to be asleep, hoping that maybe he'd feel bad and let me rest. But he never did. He'd wake me up with a tap on the shoulder. Always that same cold voice. "Time to earn our keep, girl." And off I went. To another room, another stranger, another hour of pretending I wasn't real. One night, outside of Tucson, I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize myself. My face looked too tired for a child. My eyes had this emptiness. I wasn't even 12 yet, and I felt like I'd lived 100 years. My teeth hurt from clenching my jaw so often. My hands trembled even when they were still. I started to forget what laughing felt like. I kept hoping someone would notice. A cop, a clerk, anyone. But he was smart. He made sure we didn't stay long, always moving, always watching. And me? I became invisible, a shadow in his rearview mirror. There was one woman. Her name was Loretta, I think. She worked at a diner near Albuquerque. She saw me limping, pulled me aside when he went to the bathroom. She touched my arm and asked, "Honey, are you okay? You look pale." My throat closed up. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to scream no. I wanted to cry. But all I said was, "I'm just tired," because he taught me well. Tired was safe. Tired was nothing. Loretta looked at me a long time. Then she nodded and slipped a little candy into my hand. "For later," she said. I still remember the taste. Strawberry. Sweet and sad. By the time I turned 12, I'd stopped asking questions. I stopped dreaming. I stopped marking time. Days bled into nights, and towns blurred together. The only way I knew the date was by the receipts he left crumpled in the glove box. I started keeping my own little list, hidden inside a sock. Places we'd been, people we met, things I saw. It was the only proof I had that I existed, that I was more than just a face in someone else's story. He started talking about retiring, said we'd go live by a lake somewhere, just us two. The thought made my stomach turn. I didn't want us two. I didn't want anything that included him. I wanted out. But getting out wasn't that simple. I had no ID, no money, no one who knew my real name or where I came from. If I ran, where would I go? Who would believe me? He made sure of that. He'd tell me, "You try to talk, no one's going to believe a dirty little girl like you. They'll think you're just a troublemaker." So I stayed. Not because I wanted to, because I didn't know how not to. And yet, something inside me started changing. A small flame. I began to listen more. I memorized exits. I watched people's schedules. I paid attention to when he was weakest, usually after a long night, when his head was foggy and he slept like a rock. I started thinking about running, not just dreaming it, planning it. But planning takes time, and in that time, things got worse. He didn't notice when I started hiding things. Small things, like crackers from motel breakfast trays, a plastic fork, even a little hotel soap I wrapped in tissue. I wasn't sure what I'd need to escape, but I wanted to feel like I was preparing for something. Anything. It gave me a kind of hope, even if tiny. That soap, it smelled like lemon, and some nights I held it close just to remember what clean felt like. He still called me his girl when talking to others, smiled like we were a happy little family, just a father and daughter seeing the country together. I learned to match his smile, forced, tight, just enough to pass. People bought it, most times. Some didn't. A few raised eyebrows. A motel receptionist once stared a bit too long, asked for ID he didn't have, and he got mad. We left fast. That night, he didn't speak to me at all. But his silence was never a good thing. It meant storm was coming. Sometimes he'd let men talk to me while he filled the tank. I knew what it meant. He didn't need to say it anymore. A nod, a glance, a gesture with his thumb. I'd walk slowly, knees heavy, heart somewhere near my shoes. He'd pretend to be busy, but his eyes always followed, like a hawk pretending to sleep. There was no pretending for me. At 13, I knew how to lie with my whole body. My face, my voice, the way I walked. It was all an act. Survival depended on it. I never imagined life any different. Maybe this was what girls were meant for. That's the lie I swallowed every night like medicine that never worked. Somewhere along the way, I stopped remembering my own voice. Everything I said was filtered through fear. He'd sometimes talk about my mother, like she died or vanished. Truth is, I had no idea what happened to her. One day she was there, silent and small. The next day gone. I used to imagine she'd escaped, found a better life, maybe even tried to come back for me. But as years passed, I knew. She didn't make it, not the way he talked about her. She was weak, he said once. Couldn't handle the ride. I wondered what kind of ride breaks a woman that way. There was a night outside Memphis I can't forget. Cold, raining. We were stuck in a trucker's lot, and he was drunk more than usual. Kept muttering about money, about how the road was drying up. Said I wasn't pulling in like I used to. He didn't say it like a father. He said it like a man who felt cheated. I remember he looked at me like I was a used tool, one he wasn't sure was worth keeping. That look haunted me for weeks. I started paying attention to the roads more, reading signs, exit numbers, noting where payphones were. I didn't know exactly how to use one, but I figured I'd learn. One day at a diner, I slipped a quarter into my sock while he was busy talking to a waitress. My first real step towards something of my own. That coin felt like a brick of gold. Not long after, I saw a girl, maybe a little older than me, working behind a gas station counter. She had a ponytail and cracked lips, but her eyes were alive. She smiled at a customer, and it wasn't forced. She looked free. I stared too long. She noticed. "You okay?" she asked. My throat tightened, like always. "I'm fine," I whispered, and I wanted to be. I wanted to know what her life was like. Did she go home to a room? Did she have a bed with sheets that smelled like laundry and not truck seats? I hated how much I envied her. That same night, back in the truck, he was in a bad mood. He hit the dashboard when his lighter stopped working, called me names I hadn't heard before, said I was costing him more than I was worth. I stared out the window, counting seconds between streetlights, pretending each one was a different life I could have had. He kept talking, rambling, then, suddenly, quiet. "I should have left you at that church," he said, voice low. "That preacher's wife wanted you, said she'd raise you right. I could have taken the money and gone." I froze. That was news to me. Church? What church? When? I didn't dare ask. But later that night, I lay awake wondering what my life would have been if he'd made that deal. Would I have learned to ride a bike? Had a birthday cake? Would I have known what safety felt like? I started writing things down. Just words, feelings, hopes. On napkins, motel receipts, backs of paper menus. I hid them under the seat cushion. My secret language. If he ever found them, I don't know what he'd have done. Maybe tossed me out for good, maybe worse. But I had to write. It was the only way to tell myself I was still here, that I mattered. More time passed. My body changed more, and the men looked longer. He noticed, said we had to be careful now, started picking places further out, where there were fewer cameras, fewer people. I started to understand how much he'd planned, how deliberate every choice was. He wasn't just some sad man dragging his kid along. He was running a business, and I was the inventory. I overheard him once talking to someone on the phone. Said he had 1 more year before the girl's too old. Those words hit me like a slap. Too old. What did that even mean? I wasn't old. I was barely alive. But it told me something. He had a timeline. An end. Maybe he'd dump me somewhere when I wasn't profitable. Maybe I'd vanish like my mother. It was in a town called Van Horn where things really started to crack inside me. Small place, barely a handful of buildings, and one diner that stayed open all night. We had pulled in because the truck was overheating. I remember the hiss of the engine, the steam curling into the cold air like ghosts I couldn't see. He was agitated, cursing the radiator, blaming the desert dust. I stood quietly near the pump, arms crossed, watching a moth bang itself silly against the street lamp. I envied it. At least it could fly. He found a mechanic and said we'd have to stay the night. My stomach sank. That meant another room, another knock, another man. But this time was different. Something in me didn't bend the way it used to. I didn't cry, didn't beg, just nodded like always. But inside, something refused to go numb. That night he gave me a candy bar and said, "Make it easy." Guy paid double. I took it, unwrapped it slowly. The chocolate stuck to my teeth, sweet and dry. It didn't taste like anything. Not really. I went into the room, did what I was supposed to, came out with the same hollow stare. He didn't look at me, just muttered, "Good girl," and lit a cigarette. I sat on the edge of the motel bed and stared at the carpet. That's when I realized I could hate someone, not with screaming or fists. Quiet hate, the kind that simmers and thickens until it feels like a second skin. That night, I didn't sleep. I planned. I counted what I had. 3 quarters, 2 nickels, a crumpled map, and a matchbook from a place in Amarillo. Not much, but it was something. Next morning, while he was talking with the mechanic, I snuck into the diner bathroom, locked the door, and stared at myself in the mirror. My face looked older than it should have. Lines around my eyes, skin pale. I didn't recognize me. There was a moment, just a flicker, where I thought about screaming, just opening the door and running to the counter and yelling for help. But the thought of his hands on me after that, no, I couldn't risk it yet. I had to be smart. We hit the road again. He whistled to the radio like everything was fine. I nodded when he spoke, laughed at his dumb jokes, played the role I always did. But inside, I was miles away, somewhere north maybe, somewhere green, where trucks didn't rattle and doors didn't lock from the outside. He mentioned a fair happening in Oklahoma, said it might be a good spot for fresh opportunity. That's what he called it, opportunity, like I was some kind of investment. We drove for hours. I started to notice how often he rubbed his temples, how he talked to himself more. His cough had gotten worse too. He didn't take care of himself. Always cheap food, cigarettes, barely slept. Part of me wondered how much longer he'd last. Part of me hoped not long. At a rest stop near Wichita Falls, I saw a flyer tacked to a wall near the bathrooms. It was weathered and sun-bleached, but the words were clear. Youth shelter, no questions asked. A phone number, a little cartoon of a house with hearts for windows. I stood staring at it so long he yelled from the truck, asking what was taking so long. I ripped off the tab with the number and shoved it into my shoe. My heart pounded for hours after, like I'd stolen something big. The fare was loud. Colorful lights, music, smells that made my stomach turn. Sugar and grease and too many people. He said it'd be easy. Lot of lonely men out tonight, he grinned. You just gotta smile right. I nodded, bit my lip till it bled. There were rides and games and booths, but I wasn't there to play. He pointed out a guy by the cotton candy stand, said he looked like a good peck. I walked over, tried not to shake, asked if he wanted company. He looked confused at first, then glanced toward the truck where my father leaned casually against the bumper. The man's eyes dimmed. He nodded. I followed him behind the stalls, into the dark. But something inside me screamed no. I turned around and ran. Didn't think. Just bolted through the crowd. My legs burned. My lungs felt like they'd collapse, but I didn't stop. I heard shouting behind me, him yelling my name. I ducked under a fence, tore my shirt on the wire, kept going. I ran until my feet blistered and my chest was raw from breathing. Ended up in a field behind a grocery store, collapsed in the grass. I cried without sound, didn't know where I was, only that I wasn't in that truck. For a while, that was enough. Eventually I walked, found a gas station. The clerk was young, barely older than me. He looked at my face and asked if I needed help. I nodded, asked for a phone. He handed it over. My hand shook so bad I dropped the receiver twice. Finally, I dialed the number from the flyer. A woman answered. Calm voice, warm. We're here. Where are you, sweetheart? I couldn't speak at first, just breathed. Finally, I gave her the name of the gas station. She told me to stay put, said someone would come. I sat on the curb, hugging my knees. Every car that passed made me flinch. I kept waiting for him to show up, grab me, drag me back. But he didn't. Minutes felt like hours. Then a van pulled up. A woman stepped out. Soft eyes, gray streak in her hair. She knelt beside me. Are you Lillian? I nodded. She didn't ask more, just opened the door and helped me inside. I didn't speak the whole ride. She didn't push, just let the silence sit between us like an old friend. I stared out the window, watching the world go by, not sure if I was free yet, not sure if I ever would be. The shelter smelled like laundry and soup, not the kind of soup people eat when they're happy, but the kind served from big metal pots in places that tried to fix what the world broke. They gave me clean clothes, 2 sizes too big, and a toothbrush. Told me I could shower if I wanted. I did. I stayed under the hot water until my skin turned red, like maybe if I scrubbed hard enough I could erase everything. There were other girls. Some looked younger than me. A few stared. One offered me a hair clip. I didn't talk much. Didn't know how to. My voice still belonged to him and I hadn't figured out how to take it back. At night, I lay in a bunk with a thin blanket and stared at the ceiling. There were words carved into the wood above me. Names, dates, short prayers. Some were angry. Some begged for help. I added mine with a piece of a broken pencil. LH. I'm still here. They had counselors, soft-voiced women who sat across from me in chairs that didn't creak. One asked if I wanted to talk about what happened. I shrugged, said I didn't remember. That was a lie, of course. I remembered everything. The color of the motel curtains. The names of the men he called regulars. The smell of his breath in the mornings. I remembered so much that forgetting felt like the only way to stay standing. They asked for my age. I told them I was 13, though I wasn't sure anymore. Time had melted in that truck. They asked if I had family. I lied again. Said no one. Maybe it wasn't a lie. Not really. Blood doesn't mean anything when it cuts deeper than strangers ever could. Days passed. I learned how to sit in silence without shaking. Learned to eat without looking over my shoulder. I still didn't talk much. Some girls shared their stories. One said her stepfather locked her in the attic. Another said her mum sold her for pills. We didn't comfort each other. We didn't cry in circles. That's not how it works. We just nodded, like survivors spotting other survivors in a wreck. One morning, a woman from the state came to talk. Said she was from Child Protective Services. She had a file with my name on it. I asked where she got it. She smiled. Said someone reported me years ago, but they never found me. I wanted to laugh. All that time, someone knew. Someone saw. And yet, I'd still been passed around like junk mail. She said they were trying to locate relatives. I told her not to bother. I didn't want to go back to anyone who shared his blood. She said they'd find a foster placement. A home. That word didn't mean anything to me. Home was just another room where people wanted things. Eventually, they moved me. A small house, 2 bedrooms, run by a woman named Jeanette. She wore long skirts and smelled like hand lotion. Said I could call her Miss J. Her voice reminded me of warm tea, soft but heavy. She gave me my own bed, a little drawer with my name taped on the front. At night, she played gospel music in the kitchen while she cooked, like the sound could push the bad out of the walls. I didn't trust her. I waited for the moment she'd change, like he always did. First the smile, then the slap. First the hug, then the lock. But days went by, and Miss J never raised her voice. She didn't ask questions when I jumped at loud noises, just handed me a blanket and said, "You're safe here, sugar. For real." I watched her carefully, how she folded laundry, how she whispered prayers before bed, how she never touched me without asking. One night, she brought me a glass of milk and sat at the edge of the couch. "You ain't broken," she said, looking at me like I mattered. "You've just been thrown too hard." I didn't reply, but something inside me cracked. Not in pain, in recognition. Still, it was hard. The past followed me like a shadow with claws. I had nightmares almost every night. Woke up gasping, drenched in sweat. Sometimes I'd scream. Miss J would sit in the hallway, not saying a word, just humming softly until I settled. I hated how weak I felt. Hated that part of me still jumped when someone knocked on the door. School started. I hadn't been in a classroom in years. The other kids noticed. I was awkward, behind, didn't know the slang or the songs. A boy laughed when I asked what a pop quiz was. I didn't care. I wasn't there to make friends, just to keep my head down and survive. But there was one girl, Maribel. She had a scar on her neck and never wore makeup. She sat next to me in math and lent me a pencil without asking for it back. After a few weeks, she started walking with me to the bus. We didn't talk much at first, just shared silence like people who understood what it cost to speak. Eventually, she asked if I lived with Miss J. I nodded. She said, "She's one of the good ones." That was the first time I felt lucky in years. One afternoon I got home to find a letter on my bed. No return address, just my name. I froze, opened it slowly. Inside was a single line written in that familiar jagged hand. "You're still mine." No name, no signature, but I knew. My blood ran cold. The paper shook in my hand. I crumpled it, burned it in Miss J's kitchen sink, watched the ashes swirl down the drain like smoke from a past that wouldn't die. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, trying to figure out how he found me. Had he followed me? Heard something? I didn't tell Miss J. I didn't want to leave, but I knew he wasn't done. Not yet. I started checking the windows more often. Every time a car passed too slow, I counted the seconds it stayed outside. If I heard a door slam or footsteps that didn't match the usual rhythm of the neighborhood, my chest tightened. I didn't say anything to Miss J. She'd done nothing but give me safety, warmth, space to breathe. I wasn't ready to risk that, not even for protection. Maybe especially not for it. I'd learned too well that safety could vanish if you called it out loud. I stopped going to school for a few days, faked a cough, said I needed rest. Miss J didn't push. She made me tea and kept the TV low. But I could see her watching me, not in a controlling way, just concerned. She never asked directly what was going on, but her eyes said plenty. I wasn't ready to talk. My throat had too many ghosts, and they weren't polite ones. Maribel called the house after 3 days. She didn't usually do that. I picked up and said I was fine, just tired. She didn't believe me. "You look like you're waiting for something bad," she said, like a rabbit waiting for the trap to snap. I didn't answer. She didn't hang up either, just stayed on the line, breathing with me. That meant more than I could explain. The dreams got worse. Vivid, loud, too real. I'd wake up soaked in sweat, the smell of diesel still clinging to my skin even though I hadn't been in a truck for months. One night I screamed so loud Miss J came running with a towel wrapped around her head. She didn't ask what I saw, just held my hand and said, "You don't have to say it. Just let it pass." I squeezed her fingers so tight my knuckles ached. A week later, another letter came. This one was shoved through the fence in the backyard. No envelope, no care, just bold, angry handwriting scrawled across the back of a fast food receipt. "You can run, girl, but I know where you sleep." My legs gave out when I read it. I sat in the dirt, holding that scrap like it was poison. My stomach flipped, my head buzzed. He was close, closer than I'd let myself believe. That night, I did something I never thought I would. I told Miss J everything. Not the watered-down version I gave to the social worker, not the polite summary the counselor heard. All of it. The truck, the motels, the men, the looks, the fake names, the hurt that didn't leave bruises but lived in the marrow. She listened, didn't flinch, didn't interrupt. When I finished, I braced myself, waited for the pity, the questions, the suggestion that maybe I'd misunderstood something. But she just breathed in, slow and deep, and said, "That man's a monster, but you're not his anymore." She didn't tell the agency. Not right away. She asked me what I wanted to do. No one had ever asked me that before. I didn't even know how to answer. I said I needed time. She gave it, said we'd handle it on my terms. That night I slept in her room, curled on a blanket near her bed like a scared animal. For once, I didn't dream. We started practicing what she called readiness. What to do if he came, where to run, who to call. She showed me how to use the pepper spray on her keychain, bought an extra one just for me. I hope you never need it, she said, but if you do, don't hesitate. I nodded, fingers cold on the canister. Miss J installed a new lock, reinforced the windows, made a point to walk with me to the bus stop, even if I begged her not to. Let them see someone's watching, she said. Let them wonder. I hated how much that comforted me. I hated that it had to. One afternoon, a detective showed up. Miss J had told someone at her church who used to work in law enforcement. Word spread. The woman was polite, middle-aged, smelled like peppermint gum. She didn't wear a uniform, just jeans and a worn blazer. She asked if I wanted to file a report. I couldn't speak. Not yet. I asked for more time. She respected it, left her card, said she'd be around. I carried that card everywhere, slipped it into the pocket of my jeans, right next to the pepper spray. It made my body feel less fragile, like maybe I had a line of defense now, a number to call, a name that wasn't his. A few days later, we got a call. Miss J answered, but her face changed fast. She turned pale, handed me the phone like it was a live wire. "It's him," she whispered. I almost dropped it. My hand shook, but I held it, put it to my ear, didn't speak. He breathed into the receiver, slow and ugly, then said, "You think you're safe? You think that old woman can protect you? I made you. I can unmake you." I didn't say a word, just listened. My hand got steadier. He kept talking, angry, panicked, losing control. That's when I realized he was afraid, not of me, of losing power, of being nothing if I wasn't under his thumb. I hung up without a word, took the phone, walked to the kitchen, and called the detective. My voice didn't shake. I told her everything, every detail I'd held back. She didn't ask why it took so long, just said, "I've got you now." The detective came back the next morning with 2 other people. One was a younger man with quiet shoes, the other a woman with glasses who kept scribbling in a notebook. They sat at Miss J's dining table while I told them everything. No sugar, no edits, no apologies. My voice trembled at first, but it didn't break. Once I started, I couldn't stop. The words came like floodwater. Years of silence finally spilling out. They asked careful questions. Dates, places, names if I remembered. I didn't have everything, but what I gave was enough to make them sit straighter. At one point, the man put his pen down and looked at me like I'd just handed him a piece of his own soul. The woman nodded slowly, as if she'd been waiting years to hear someone say what I did. I didn't need comfort. I needed them to believe me, and they did. They asked if I knew where he might be. I didn't, but I remembered the patterns, how he circled back to certain towns, how he liked small places where no one paid attention. I gave them a list, said he used fake names sometimes, that he had tattoos, one on his wrist, another on the back of his neck, a snake wrapped around a wrench. The man with the quiet shoes wrote that down twice. Later that day, they left with the promise they'd be in touch. I didn't expect anything fast. Justice doesn't move quick for girls like me. I'd seen enough to know that. But it was the first time someone outside Miss J looked me in the eye and said, "We believe you." The days that followed were a blur of waiting and trying not to fall apart. I kept going to school, kept pretending I was just another teenager who had homework and bad cafeteria food. But inside, I was a storm. Maribel noticed, asked if I was okay. I told her I'd finally talked. She didn't ask what I meant, just said, "It's about damn time." One evening, Miss J made gumbo, and we sat on the porch. The air was warm, but I still felt cold. She handed me a bowl and said, "You know, sugar, healing ain't something you chase. It comes when you stop looking under every bed." I didn't answer. I just stared at the trees swaying like they didn't know what pain was. That night, I had another dream. This one different. He was chasing me, like always. But this time I wasn't running. I stood still, let him come. And when he reached me, I opened my mouth. Not to scream, but to speak. I said his name, his real one, loud and clear, and he vanished. I woke up with my hand clenched around the bedsheet and the taste of that name still on my tongue. 2 weeks passed before the call came. The detective said they'd found him in Louisiana. He'd been using a different name, working at a truck repair shop. Someone had recognized the tattoo, said he always kept a girl with him. Not anymore. When they got to him, he was alone. The girl was gone. No one knew where she went. My heart sank for her. Whoever she was, wherever she ended up, I hoped she'd get a chance like I did. They arrested him on the spot, said he didn't resist, just looked tired. When they told him why, he laughed. That girl? She was mine. She liked the road. Those were his words. They told me. I didn't cry, didn't scream, just felt something inside me close like a door finally locked from the inside. Court was next. I didn't want to go. The detective said it was my choice, said they had enough from my statements to move forward without me. But I went anyway. Sat in the courtroom wearing a borrowed dress and too tight shoes. Miss J beside me, her hand warm against mine. When they brought him in, I didn't look away. He didn't either. His face didn't change, not a flicker, like I was a ghost he barely remembered. But I remembered everything. The smell of his jacket, the feel of the truck seat, the way he used to call me baby before handing me over to strangers. My stomach turned, but I stayed still. They listed the charges. So many I lost count. The words felt heavy in the air. Transportation, coercion, exploitation. Words I never used growing up. Words I lived without knowing their names. The prosecutor said I was brave. I didn't feel brave. I felt tired, like a ragged page someone kept writing on. He didn't testify. His lawyer did all the talking. Tried to spin it, twist the story. Said I was a troubled girl. Said my memory was unreliable, but every time they said my name, the truth burned a little brighter in my chest. I knew who I was now, not a victim, not a product, a person, a girl who got out. When the verdict came, I didn't breathe. The judge read the sentence. Years, decades, enough to keep him far from me, from any girl. He didn't flinch, just stared at the wall like he'd already left. I stood when it ended. Didn't look back. Outside the sun was too bright. Miss J held my hand, said nothing. We walked to her car. The world felt different, not lighter, just real, like I wasn't floating in fear anymore, like maybe I could start learning what it meant to live. After the trial, everyone expected things to get better, as if the verdict had some kind of magic that could sweep years of dirt off a soul. People kept saying I was brave, strong, that I'd done the right thing. But none of those words reached where it hurt. They floated on the surface like sunlight on muddy water. Beneath it, everything was still murky, still moving. Miss J tried to give me space. She didn't push routines or ask for smiles. Just let me be quiet when I needed and sat close when the weight got heavy. I spent hours in her backyard, watching birds pick at seeds. Their wings fascinated me, how something so small could carry a body through the sky. I wondered if my insides were too full of stone to ever lift off. At school, nothing really changed. Most of the kids didn't know, or if they did, they didn't say. Maribel stayed near, but even she looked at me different sometimes, like she didn't know if I'd break or bite. I didn't blame her. I didn't know either. I started keeping to myself more. Spent lunch in the library where no one looked too hard or asked where I came from. Books didn't care what I'd been through. One afternoon, I found an old novel with underlined sentences and dog-eared pages. Inside, someone had written, "Pain don't make you dirty. It makes you real." I read that line 5 times. Felt like it was meant for me. I copied it onto a scrap of paper and tucked it into my shoe, right next to that detective's card. A reminder that I wasn't just what happened to me. Nights were still hard. Sleep didn't come easy. And when it did, it brought memories dressed up as dreams. I'd wake up breathless, heart pounding, unsure if I was still in that truck. Miss J always left her door cracked, light spilling into the hallway like a promise. I'd sit on the floor, back against the wall, waiting for the shaking to stop. One night she brought me hot cocoa, sat beside me in her robe, no questions, no pity, just presence. After a while I whispered, "What if I never feel normal?" She looked at me, slow and steady, like she was choosing her words from someplace deep. Baby, normal is just a word folks made up to feel safe. You're real. That's better. I started seeing a therapist, not the kind with clipboards and clinical smiles. This one had a voice like gravel and wore cowboy boots to every session. Her name was Ruth. First thing she said was, "You don't owe me anything but honesty." I didn't speak for 3 sessions, just sat there, arms crossed, counting cracks in the ceiling. On the 4th, I told her about the letter. Not the first one, the last one, the one that made my bones feel hollow. She nodded, said, "You carried fear longer than most carry love. That takes a toll." Every week, I gave her a little more. Not always in order, not always clean. Some days I left angry, others with a weight lifted. She never judged, never tried to fix me, just listened, like my words were worth something. That alone was healing. As time passed, my body changed again. Not just the usual growing up changes, but how I held myself. I started walking straighter, looked people in the eye more often, still had moments where a certain cologne or a particular song sent me spiraling. But I learned how to come back quicker, learned how to breathe through the panic instead of letting it swallow me whole. I started writing, not in a journal, not like school essays, just stories, little scenes, dialogues, things I wished had happened, things I was glad never did. At first I didn't show anyone. Then one day I handed a page to Miss J. She read it twice, tears in her eyes, said, "You have a voice, baby, and it's sharp. Don't hide it." She helped me submit one of my pieces to a youth writing contest. I didn't win, but I got an honorable mention and a letter from one of the judges saying my words had bone-deep truth. I pinned it on my wall, not because of the praise, but because someone saw me without knowing my past, and still thought I mattered. Ruth said that was healing too, being seen outside the pain, making space for joy. She encouraged me to try new things, even small ones. I joined the yearbook staff, took photos, wrote little blurbs. Nothing fancy, but it gave me purpose, gave me days that didn't start and end in shadows. Spring came. With it, warmth that didn't feel threatening. I started wearing short sleeves again, let the sun touch my skin without shame. One day at school, a teacher asked if I'd help tutor a younger student who was struggling with reading. Her name was Jada. Tiny thing, barely spoke. First time we sat together, she wouldn't even look at me. I understood that, so I didn't push. Week after week, she opened up, slowly. She smiled at one of my jokes, laughed once, read a full page out loud without stumbling. The day she hugged me goodbye, I went home and cried for an hour, not because I was sad, but because for the first time I gave someone else what I never had. The closer I got to 15, the more people started expecting me to be whole again, like time was some kind of medicine and I'd been taking the right dose. I smiled more often, laughed when jokes landed, even started making my bed every morning without Miss J reminding me. But under all that, something stayed clenched, like a muscle I didn't know how to relax. Healing wasn't a straight line, and some days it didn't feel like healing at all. It felt like survival dressed in new clothes. I still jumped when someone walked too fast behind me, still hated the sound of engines turning over, especially the heavy kind, the ones that rumbled like trucks. One afternoon at the grocery store, a guy in a denim jacket brushed past me too close, and I froze. My feet stopped working, my mouth dried up, and all I could hear was the blood in my ears. Miss J noticed. She turned around, stepped between us without saying a word, and stood there until I could breathe again. After that, I asked Ruth if fear ever really left or if it just learned how to sit quietly. She said it depends. Said some fears live in the basement, others sit on the porch and wave. I didn't know which kind I had yet, just knew it followed me like a shadow I didn't invite but couldn't shake. One weekend, we visited a community center where they were holding a workshop for teens with difficult pasts, as they called it. I hated the phrase. Felt like a label people gave when they didn't want to say the truth out loud. The session was run by a man who'd been through prison and now worked with youth programs. His story was nothing like mine, but pain as a way of recognizing itself, no matter the shape. He talked about anger, about how it turns into silence when no one listens, about how that silence becomes a scream you keep locked inside. I felt that, not just in my head, in my ribs, my teeth, the backs of my eyes. After the session, I asked him how long it took before the screaming stopped. He looked at me and said, "Sometimes it doesn't. You just learn how to sing over it." That stuck with me. I wrote it down and taped it to my wall next to the writing contest letter. My wall was starting to look like a timeline of survival. Quotes, notes, pieces of a girl who didn't disappear after all. One day, a woman from a nonprofit came to speak at school. She talked about advocacy, about helping kids who'd been through the system, kids who slipped through the cracks. She handed out brochures and said they were looking for volunteers. Something in me twitched. Not nerves, not fear, something else. A spark. I took the paper home, sat with it for hours before showing Miss J. She read it, smiled, and said, "Maybe it's time you start building something for yourself." So I signed up, filled out the forms, did the orientation, showed up twice a week. At first I just organized files and handed out snacks. But then I started listening to the kids, watching them, their eyes, their movements, the way they spoke without saying much. I saw myself in all of them. There was one boy, Jerome, 9 years old, thin arms, didn't talk unless it was about comic books. He latched onto me like a magnet, followed me around, sat close without touching. We had an unspoken agreement. He'd tell me what happened in his comics, and I wouldn't ask about his bruises. One day, he handed me a drawing of a superhero with long brown hair and a backpack full of fire. "That's you," he said. "You fight bad guys with words." I didn't know how to respond, just held the paper to my chest and nodded. Back home, I couldn't stop thinking about how much had changed. Just 2 years before, I was hiding in bathrooms and whispering prayers I didn't believe in. Now someone saw strength in me I hadn't even named yet. That night, I opened the drawer beside my bed and pulled out the old matchbook from Amarillo. I stared at it for a long time, then finally tore it in half. Not out of rage, out of release. The next morning, Miss J made pancakes. She never said why, but I think she felt something shift too. Over breakfast, she asked if I wanted to start looking into GED programs. Said I was smart enough to go anywhere I wanted. I shrugged, told her I hadn't thought that far ahead. She smiled, said, "You're allowed to now." Later that day, the phone rang. It was Ruth. She said someone from the DA's office wanted to speak to me. There was going to be another case, another girl, not the one from before, a new one. They believed he had more victims, and they wanted me to testify again. My stomach dropped, not because I didn't want to help, but because I knew what that meant. Going back, saying things out loud in front of strangers, hearing his name, seeing his file, reopening wounds that had barely scabbed. I told Miss J first. She didn't say I had to, didn't tell me what she thought I should do, just said, "Whatever you choose, I'm standing beside you." I told Ruth I needed time. She said they understood, that they'd wait for my decision. I spent the rest of the day walking around the block, breathing in the spring air, counting birds on telephone wires, trying to find a version of myself that could handle this again. That night, I sat on the porch long after the sun went down. The stars were out, quiet and distant. I thought about that girl, whoever she was, wondered if she'd escaped yet, or if she was still trapped in that same dark place I knew too well. I remembered being 13, sitting in a motel bathroom with the door locked and my ear pressed to the wall, praying he'd fall asleep before calling me out. I said yes, told Ruth they could count on me, not because I was ready, but because I couldn't stand the thought of another girl thinking no one would ever come for her. They flew me out to meet with the DA. Different state, different building, but the same cold feeling in my gut when I walked through those courthouse doors. They handed me a file, thicker than before, names I didn't recognize. Some were blacked out, some barely older than I'd been. Every page felt like a punch, but I kept reading. The prosecutor, a woman named Holland, didn't smile much. She didn't try to soften the facts, and I respected that. She said the new case was stronger, backed by physical evidence and multiple witness statements. Mine wasn't needed, but it would make a difference. "You're the thread that ties it all together," she said. I nodded. Didn't say how heavy that thread felt around my throat. They asked me to write a statement first, to put everything in my own words so they could get a sense of my voice, my pace. I stayed up all night in the hotel room with a legal pad and a ballpoint pen, writing until my hand cramped. I didn't edit, didn't hold back. I wrote about the gas station stalls, the motel towels that never felt clean, the way his voice dropped an octave when he got mean. I wrote about the silence he taught me, and how I finally broke it. By the time I finished, the sun was rising. I folded the pages and placed them on the nightstand like they were made of glass. When I walked into the courtroom 2 days later, I didn't feel brave. I felt wired, tight, like if someone touched me, I'd snap in half. But I walked anyway, took the stand, swore in, looked straight ahead. He was there, sitting behind his lawyer, hair grayer, posture lower, but eyes just as cold. I didn't flinch. I looked at him like I was looking at a mirror that no longer reflected anything back. I told my story again, from the start. Not for the jury, not even for him. For the girl whose name was in that file, redacted but real. I spoke slowly, letting each word land like it had roots. There were gasps in the room. Someone cried. I didn't. I stayed locked in. My voice didn't crack. My hands didn't shake. When it was over, I stepped down, walked past him, and didn't look back. Outside the courtroom, Holland said I'd done more than testify. I'd opened a door they thought would stay shut forever. Said 2 more victims came forward after hearing my name. I didn't feel proud. I felt drained, but somewhere deep, beneath the exhaustion, was something steady. Like maybe the part of me he tried to kill had grown back with sharper edges. Back home, Miss J had baked a pie. Said she wanted to celebrate, even if I didn't feel like it. She made tea and we sat on the porch, watching the wind bend the trees. She didn't ask questions, just sat near me, humming a gospel tune I'd heard 100 times before. I leaned into the silence and let it hold me for once. Days passed. Letters started coming. From organizations, from survivors, from people I didn't know. One girl wrote, "Your story helped me leave." Another said, "I thought I was crazy until I saw myself in your words." I read each one slow, heart full of things I couldn't name. It didn't fix anything, but it stitched something back together. I kept volunteering, started speaking at local events, not often, just enough to remind myself I wasn't invisible anymore. Each time it got a little easier, my voice stronger, my feet firmer on the ground. Some days the weight came back, heavy, thick, like tar under the skin. But now I knew how to carry it without letting it crush me. One night I got a call from Jerome's new foster mom. She said he'd made a comic book, one where the superhero wasn't just a sidekick this time, but the main character. She said he named her the girl who burned the dark. I cried then, not from sadness, from something else, something like relief. A few weeks later, Ruth asked if I wanted to speak at a conference. Big one. Survivors, advocates, lawmakers, the kind of room I used to think was too far above me. I said yes before I had time to second guess. Wrote my speech in a single sitting, no edits, no trimming, just truth. Stood up in front of that crowd and told them how I lived, how I was sold, silenced, survived, and how I fought my way back with nothing but spit, grit, and the memory of the girl I used to be. When it ended, the room stood. Not just clapped, stood. I walked off stage and didn't cry, not until I was alone, not until I saw Miss J standing near the back, her hands over her mouth, eyes full of pride so loud I didn't need applause. That night, I lay in bed and thought about that first time in the truck, the way he said, "You're my lucky charm," the way I believed him. I thought about the first motel room, the first lie, the first time I stopped being a child. Then I thought about now, this bed, this home, this body I'm finally starting to own again. I reached under my pillow and pulled out the old piece of paper I'd kept. "Pain don't make you dirty. It makes you real." I read it again. Then, for the first time in years, I folded it and placed it in the trash. I didn't expect peace to be so quiet. Nobody tells you that after the noise stops, after the running, the crying, the courtroom whispers, the names you stopped answering to, you'll be left with a kind of silence that doesn't know what to do with itself. At first, I tried to fill it. Music, books, long walks, late-night phone calls with Ruth, where I didn't even have a reason to talk. Just needed the sound of someone breathing on the other end. But eventually, I stopped fighting it. Started letting the quiet be a kind of company. Miss J helped me apply for GED testing. I passed on the first try. Surprised myself, honestly. I wasn't dumb, just interrupted. That's what Ruth used to say. You weren't lost, just interrupted. I kept that in my back pocket like a lucky charm. The kind that didn't come from a man with a truck and cold hands. I started taking community college classes in the evenings. Psychology, writing, a little sociology. The first essay I turned in got a B+. The professor said it was unfiltered and brave. I smiled without knowing I was smiling. There were still days when everything felt raw, when a certain phrase, a smell, or even the wrong kind of silence could send my chest tightening like a fist. I'd sit with Miss J, both of us pretending to watch whatever was on the screen, and she'd say, "You're allowed to feel it. Just don't let it set up camp in your bones." So I'd feel it, cry if I needed, get up after. That's the thing nobody explains about healing. It's not about not hurting anymore. It's about learning you're allowed to get up every time it tries to knock you down again. Jerome graduated from elementary school, sent me a picture in the mail with a note that said, "Thanks for teaching me that broken people still got magic." I kept that photo on my desk next to a small jar filled with seashells Miss J brought back from a church retreat. She said they were ordinary, but each one was different, cracked in their own way, but still whole. I met someone, not the way it happens in books, with sparks and violins, just slow, steady, the way two wounded animals circle each other until trust outweighs fear. His name was Levi. He worked at the local bookstore, had eyes like rain and never asked more than I was willing to give. He'd let me pick the music in his car and never reach for my hand unless I reached first. I told him bits and pieces, not all at once, just enough. One night I said, "There are parts of me that don't come with instructions." He kissed my forehead and said, "I'm not trying to fix you, just want to know where to stand." I didn't know men could sound like that. The first time I let him see my scars, physical and otherwise, I didn't feel shame, just truth. I told him about the letters, the trial, the girl I used to be. He listened, didn't flinch, didn't turn it into a moment, just nodded, like he'd been waiting for me to trust myself enough to say it out loud. That night, I slept without dreams. I still keep Ruth's number on speed dial. Sometimes I call just to say I'm okay. Sometimes I'm not. And that's fine too. She always answers. Always reminds me that I've done something most people can't even imagine. Survived, spoke, stayed. She once said I'd end up helping more people than I'd ever hurt. I didn't believe her then. I do now. Miss J retired last spring. She moved to a little house near the lake and said she's finally learning how to rest. Before she left, she gave me her favorite mug, the one with chipped paint and the words "Mercy Winds" faded on the side. I drink from it every morning. It reminds me of her voice. Gentle, sure, the kind of sound that held me together when I thought I'd fall apart. I never went back to where it started. Don't think I ever will. That part of the road doesn't need me walking it again. I carry enough memory without retracing those steps. Instead, I go forward. I speak at shelters sometimes, talk to girls whose eyes carry that same hollow I used to see in mirrors. I never say, "It'll be okay." That's a lie people use when they don't know what else to say. I tell them, it won't be easy, but it'll be yours. The fight, the healing, the life, yours. There's one girl, Tanya, 14, quiet as snowfall. She came up after a talk, barely whispered, "I don't know how to start." I looked her in the eyes and said, "You just did." She hugged me, shook like she hadn't let anyone close in a long time. I held her, not like a savior, not like a symbol, just like someone who remembers. I still have the old map, the one I kept under my sock back when I was counting towns and memorizing exits. I unfolded it last week for the first time in years. It's torn in places, stained, faded. I traced the path with my finger, the one that led from motel to motel, from fear to fear. Then I drew a new line, one that leads here, this home, this body, this version of me that wasn't erased. Some nights I sit by the window with a notebook, write letters I'll never send, to the girl I was, to the ones I couldn't save, to the man who thought I'd stay silent. I don't write with rage anymore. I write with power, with ownership, with the weight of every word I never got to say when I was small. And if there's anything I know now, it's this. He didn't win. He didn't bury me. He didn't break the last of me. He just made the mistake of thinking I wouldn't grow back stronger than he could ever imagine. If you made it this far, sweetheart, go ahead and leave a like and drop a comment. Let me know you are here. It means more than you think.